The restaurant woke up slowly every morning, just like her. Chairs were flipped down from tables, the smell of cleaning spray mixed with fresh coffee. And soft music played low, almost like it was afraid to be heard. She arrived before the doors opened, tying her apron while the sky outside was still pale and quiet. This shift was not special. None of them ever were. She checked the schedule taped near the kitchen door. Another long day. Her feet already ached just thinking about it. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped into the dining area. The place looked calm now, but she knew what was coming. By lunchtime, it would be loud, crowded, and demanding. She had been working here for years. Long enough to know which tables wobbled, which customers complained the most, and which coworkers liked to disappear during busy hours. She had learned how to smile without feeling it, how to apologize even when things weren't her fault, and how to move fast without looking rushed. Customers rarely noticed her face. They saw the apron, the notepad, the refill of water glasses. To them, she was part of the background, like the walls or the menus. She had gotten used to that. At first, it hurt. Over time, it became normal. Bills waited at home. Rent, groceries. Life didn't pause just because she was tired. Dreams were expensive, and reality demanded payment every month. So she kept going. Day after day, by mid-morning, the restaurant filled with regulars. Some nodded at her without really looking. Others talked loudly, laughing as if the world owed them happiness. She moved between tables, writing orders, carrying plates, listening to stories she would forget by the end of the shift. In one corner of the restaurant stood an old piano. It had been there long before she started working. Dark wood, slightly scratched, keys yellowed with age. Most people thought it was decoration. Some assumed it didn't even work. Children sometimes touched the keys, pressing random notes until their parents pulled them away. She passed that piano dozens of times a day. Sometimes her eyes drifted toward it, without her meaning to. She never stopped walking when that happened. Never slowed down. Just a glance, then back to work. The lunch rush came hard and fast. Orders piled up. Plates clattered. Someone complained about cold food. Someone else asked for extra sauce after the meal had already arrived. Her legs moved on their own, like they knew the routine better than her mind did. A coworker brushed past her and whispered a quick complaint about tips. She nodded, pretending to agree even though her thoughts were far away. Somewhere quieter, somewhere softer, there were moments during the rush when everything blurred together. The noise, the faces, the constant movement. In those moments, she felt like she could disappear and no one would notice. The idea was both scary and strangely comforting. Around mid-afternoon, things slowed down. The restaurant breathed again. Empty tables waited for the evening crowd. She wiped counters, refilled napkins, and stacked menus. Her reflection in the glass window looked tired. Older than she felt inside, she remembered a time when her days didn't look like this. A time when her hands weren't always carrying trays. A time when silence meant focus, not exhaustion. Those memories didn't come often, but when they did, they stayed longer than she wanted. She shook her head slightly, as if clearing dust from her thoughts. Thinking too much only made the hours heavier. She had learned that lesson early. A customer asked for the check. Another wanted dessert. She answered politely, doing what she always did. No one asked about her life. No one needed to. The piano sat quietly in its corner. Light from the window touched its surface, showing fingerprints from years of neglect. A few keys were chipped, but they still held their shape. It looked patient, like it was waiting for something. She noticed it more on slow days like this. When the noise faded, the silence made space for thoughts she usually pushed away. She walked past it again, close enough to feel its presence. But she didn't stop. The manager called out a reminder about evening reservations. She nodded again, always nodding, always agreeing. It was easier that way. As the sun began to lower, the restaurant changed its mood. Softer lights, new customers, different energy. People dressed better, talked slower, stayed longer. The kind of crowd that noticed details. but only the ones they cared about. She adjusted her apron and prepared for the next rush. Her body was tired, but her mind felt restless. Like something unfinished was following her through the day. Someone near the piano mentioned it casually, asking if it ever got played. Another person laughed and said it was probably broken. The comment passed quickly, forgotten as soon as it was spoken. She heard it anyway. Her hands paused for just a second. No one noticed. She picked up a menu and kept moving. The evening went on. Orders, smiles, apologies, thank yous. The usual rhythm. Yet something felt different. She couldn't explain it. The room felt heavier, like it was holding its breath without knowing why. She stopped near the service station and looked around. People eating, talking, living their lives. None of them knew her story. None of them knew how many times she had told herself that this was enough, that this was all she needed. She told herself that again and again. The piano remained quiet. By the time the dinner rush slowed, her feet hurt badly. She leaned against the counter for a moment, stretching her fingers. Her hands were steady. They always were. A strange calm settled over her. The kind that comes before a storm or a decision. She didn't know which one this was. She glanced toward the piano once more. Just a glance. Just curiosity, she told herself. Nothing more, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't look away immediately. Something old stirred inside her. Something she had buried under shifts and schedules and survival. She felt it gently, like a memory knocking instead of breaking down the door. She exhaled slowly and returned to her work. For now, the night was not over yet, and neither was she. The day had ended, but her mind did not. She walked slowly through the empty restaurant, the clatter of chairs settling and the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The piano in the corner caught her eye again. Its dark wood reflected the soft evening light, making it seem almost alive, patient and waiting. She stopped just short of it and ran her fingers along the edge. Dust rose in tiny clouds, but she did not mind. It felt like a small invitation, one she had not heard in years. She remembered when music had been everything. Before the restaurant, before long shifts, before the constant struggle to pay bills, there had been music. It had started with her hands hovering over a piano at a small sunlit studio in her neighborhood. At first, her lessons were simple scales and exercises, but she fell in love with the way her fingers could shape sounds, make notes, dance, and turn silence into something alive. In that world, nothing else existed. Life felt lighter, freer, possible. But life had not been kind. Her family had faced hardships, bills had piled up, and dreams had seemed like luxuries she could not afford. The piano, once a place of joy, became a memory she carried quietly in her chest. She put it away. School, work, survival, these became her reality. Music waited, patient and quiet. Tucked away behind the noise of life, she leaned against the piano now, letting her thoughts drift. She remembered practicing for hours, losing herself in the patterns of the keys, the rise and fall of melodies. It had been her escape. When the world was too loud, too cruel, too demanding, she had a place where she could be herself. A place where she could breathe. The memory made her heart ache. She had not played in years, not since life had forced her to choose between survival and passion. And yet something deep inside told her that the piano had not forgotten her. She could feel it in the quiet air of the empty restaurant. In the faint echo of sounds she almost remembered, her fingers brushed the keys lightly. They felt strange at first, foreign almost, but a flicker of familiarity returned. Notes she had not touched in years trembled under her touch, imperfect but alive. She hesitated. Could she really play? After so long, would it matter if she did? These questions swirled in her mind, but the piano seemed to answer in its own silent way. Waiting without judgment, the restaurant's dim lights cast shadows across the floor, making the room feel smaller, more intimate. For the first time in a long time, she let herself imagine playing just for herself, without anyone watching or judging. Music had once been private, sacred, a place where no one could interrupt. She closed her eyes and let her memory take over. letting her fingers find the notes they had once known. Softly at first, a single note sounded. Then, another. She felt her body relax in a way she had forgotten was possible. The music began to take shape, hesitant at first, then flowing. Her mind cleared, leaving only the rhythm, the sound, the feeling of being alive. For a few moments, nothing else existed. The restaurant, the customers, the work, the bills, they all faded. She remembered how music had always reflected her emotions. Joy, sadness, hope, and fear could all be expressed through a single melody. She felt it now, the weight of years pressing against her chest, and she let it pour out through the keys. Every note was a piece of her story, a story no one else had seen, a story she had carried silently for too long. The piano did not judge her mistakes. She stumbled occasionally, hitting wrong keys, missing notes, but it did not care. It only responded, patient and understanding, as if it had waited for this moment all along. The music became a conversation, a dialogue between her and something bigger than herself. She realized that she had never truly lost her gift. It had been waiting quietly, ready for her return. As she played, memories of lessons and teachers returned. She remembered the encouragement, the corrections, the long hours spent perfecting even the smallest movements. She remembered the pride she had felt after performing a difficult piece flawlessly. And now she realized that same pride could still exist, quietly. Even in the corner of this restaurant, her hands moved faster, more confidently. The melodies were not perfect, but they were hers, raw and authentic. She allowed herself to smile softly. It felt strange, almost foreign, to feel so alive after so long. Music had reminded her of who she was before the world told her she had to survive first, dream second. She paused and listened. The restaurant was silent. The chairs, tables, and walls seemed to echo her playing. No one had entered. No one had watched. But that did not matter. She understood something in that moment. She did not need an audience to remember her worth. She did not need applause to feel alive. Music itself was enough. Yet she could not ignore the small thrill that lingered in the back of her mind. What if someone had seen? What if someone had heard? The thought made her pulse quicken. She was used to invisibility, to being unnoticed, to being just another part of the background. But the piano, patient and knowing, reminded her that the world could notice, that she could be seen. The memory of performing in front of others came back. It had been terrifying at first, standing in front of people and letting her emotions flow through her fingers. But the moment she began, it had felt natural, like breathing. And now, standing alone, she remembered that courage. She realized that her fear had kept her from trying, but it had not erased her talent. She played longer now, letting the music fill the space completely. Her body moved with it, swaying slightly, feeling the rhythm in her bones. The piano responded to her emotions, as if it had been waiting for this reunion, waiting for her to remember the joy she had almost forgotten. Time became meaningless. The hours of her shift, the exhaustion, the endless tasks, they all disappeared. In their place was music, freedom, and a deep sense of connection she had not felt in years. She allowed herself to dream again, just a little, just enough to feel hope stirring in her chest. Eventually, she stopped, her fingers hovering over the keys. Silence returned, but it felt different now, richer, full of possibility. She looked at the piano, feeling a strange gratitude for its patience. For the way it had reminded her of who she truly was. She knew the world would continue to demand her attention. Bills, shifts, responsibilities, they were still waiting. But something inside her had changed. She had touched a part of herself that could not be ignored, a part that could not be buried forever. The piano had awakened it, quietly, without fanfare, without judgment. She straightened, took a deep breath, and walked back to the service area. Her movements felt lighter now, even though her body was tired. The shift had not ended, the work was not done. She carried a new energy, a spark that had been missing for too long. As she glanced back at the piano, she smiled softly. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know if she would play again or if anyone would ever hear her, but for now, She remembered the sound of her own hands, the joy of creating something from nothing, the freedom of expressing herself in a way that no one could take away. The restaurant hummed softly around her, the lights dimming for the night. Outside, the world continued indifferent and unaware, but inside her, a quiet fire had been lit. Music had returned, and with it, a reminder that life was more than survival. It was about feeling, about being alive, about remembering who she was even when the world tried to forget. And in that quiet corner, the piano waited patiently, ready to sing again whenever she chose to return. The next day, the restaurant was busy again. The morning rush had passed, but a steady hum of conversation and clinking plates filled the air. She moved through the tables, carrying orders and smiling politely, all while feeling a quiet tension in her chest. The memory of yesterday lingered, the sound of the piano and the feel of the keys still vivid in her mind. She hadn't planned to play again, not yet. But the thought stayed with her, refusing to go away. The piano sat quietly in its corner, as if waiting for her. Sunlight from the large windows struck its worn surface, highlighting scratches and smudges she had never noticed before. She paused near it, brushing a finger along the edge, almost without realizing. It called to her in a way she could no longer ignore. A customer laughed at a joke across the room, and a waiter called out a table number. She took a deep breath, letting the noise wash over her. Then, on impulse, she moved toward the piano. Her heart thumped. She wasn't supposed to do this in front of people. The restaurant wasn't a concert hall. No one expected her to play. And yet, the desire to sit at the keys was too strong to resist. She lowered herself onto the bench, her fingers hovering above the keys. Her hands felt nervous, unfamiliar with an audience, even if it was unintentional. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the freedom she had felt yesterday, the way music had lifted her above the weight of the world. She reminded herself that this was for her, not for anyone else. The first note sounded soft, almost shy. She played another, then another, letting the melody grow slowly. At first, no one noticed. The conversations continued, silverware clinking against plates. She let the music move her fingers naturally, remembering the flow, the patterns, the feeling of creating something alive. Then a child near the piano stopped talking. Small eyes widened. The child's mother looked up from her plate, curious. Another customer turned slightly, frowning, as they tried to place a spoon back on a dish. Slowly, heads began to lift. People paused mid-conversation, wondering where the sound was coming from. Her heart raced, but she kept playing. She couldn't stop now. The music flowed from her fingers, unplanned, raw, honest. Every note was filled with a part of her story, a story no one had known until now. The room began to change around her. The steady hum of chatter softened. Conversations halted. Eyes turned toward the piano, and for the first time, she felt seen not as a waitress, not as background noise, but as someone alive. Someone with a voice. A man at a table by the window leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. His expression was one of surprise and wonder. A group of teenagers stopped scrolling on their phones, staring. Even the cooks in the kitchen peeked out from the doorway, unsure what was happening. She noticed all of this peripherally, but she did not stop. The music had taken over. It carried her away from exhaustion, from bills, from the weight of endless shifts. The melody shifted, soft and gentle, like a whisper, then grew louder, more confident. It spoke of longing, of hidden dreams, of strength and courage. She felt herself telling her story with every movement of her hands. The room responded without words. Silence stretched in a way that felt heavy and full, almost sacred. A waiter passing by froze, a tray of food balanced carefully in his hands. He watched, mesmerized. A woman sitting alone at a table wiped away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Children sat still, mesmerized by the strange beauty of the music. She realized that no one was moving now. Not really. They were listening. They were present. She had never imagined this. She had played alone yesterday, and it had felt private, personal. But this was different. The sound of the piano had become larger than her, filling the entire restaurant, drawing people in, breaking through walls they didn't even know they had built. Her fingers moved faster, confident now. She didn't need to think about the notes. They came naturally, a language she had learned as a child and had never forgotten. The music carried her emotions, her joy, her sorrow, and something else, hope. She had forgotten how powerful that could feel until now. A man at the back of the restaurant whispered to his companion, "Do you hear that? Who is that playing?" No one knew. Some customers looked around, trying to find the source, as if expecting a hidden performer. They didn't see her at first. She was small in comparison to the large room, wearing her apron, her hair pulled back, unassuming. But the music betrayed her. It revealed her completely. When she glanced up, she caught sight of faces staring at her. Not critically, not judgmentally, but with wonder. People were noticing her, not as someone serving tables, but as someone who could create beauty. She almost stopped, afraid of being exposed, afraid that reality might rush back in. But she kept going. She had waited too long for this. The melody shifted again, this time slower, heavier, more deliberate. She thought of all the years she had spent hiding, all the time she had told herself that survival mattered more than dreams. She thought of the quiet evenings spent staring at the piano from afar, imagining what it would feel like to touch it again. And now she was doing it. Now it was real. A few customers stood, unsure if they should applaud or just listen. The atmosphere was electric. She could feel the energy in the room, the curiosity and amazement building around her. People were leaning forward, watching her fingers glide across the keys, following the rise and fall of the notes. Some even held their breath, afraid to break the moment. The restaurant had transformed. What had been ordinary, routine, and unnoticed had become extraordinary. The walls seemed smaller, the air warmer, and the lights softer. For a moment, the restaurant was no longer just a place to eat. It was a hall of music, and she was the conductor, the storyteller. The invisible artist finally seen. She felt a sense of freedom she had never felt at work. The exhaustion, the repetition, the endless tasks, they were still there, waiting, but she had escaped them, if only for a little while. Her hands told her story, her soul spoke through sound, and no one could take that away. When the last notes faded, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. She held her hands above the keys, waiting for something, though she wasn't sure what. And then, slowly, softly, the first clap came. One person started, then another. Then the room erupted into applause, hesitant at first, then louder, more genuine. She froze, unsure if she should respond. She had never sought recognition, had never imagined this moment, and yet it was happening. People were cheering, smiling, some with tears in their eyes. She could not believe it. The applause continued, filling the room surrounding her. Her heart pounded. She smiled, nervous but genuine, a smile that had nothing to do with service and everything to do with who she truly was. The customers clapped longer than she expected, and some even stood, giving her the recognition she had never asked for but secretly longed to receive. A man at the counter spoke quietly to the manager, saying, "Who is that?" "She's amazing. I've never heard anything like it in my life." The manager smiled, still unsure how to respond. As if realizing that the quiet waitress everyone ignored could hold such power, she finally lowered her hands from the keys, her body trembling slightly from the rush of adrenaline. She had done it. She had played, and people had listened. People had noticed. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with work or responsibility. The piano sat quietly again, dust motes floating in the light, patient as ever. She looked at it, a silent conversation passing between them. The piano had been waiting for her, and she had answered. She returned to the counter, still smiling softly, the adrenaline slowly fading but leaving a new kind of energy behind. She could feel it in her chest, a warmth she had not felt in years. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she would play again, or if anyone would ever ask her to. But for now, the moment was enough. The restaurant resumed its usual rhythm, but it felt different. The customers were quieter, softer, more aware. The staff looked at her with new eyes, though they did not say anything. Something had changed. Something had shifted. She had changed, and as she walked past the piano, brushing her fingers lightly over the keys, she knew one thing with certainty. She had found a piece of herself again, and she was not going to let it go. The next few days felt different in the restaurant. She moved through the tables as usual, taking orders, refilling drinks, and answering questions with polite smiles, but there was a subtle shift in the air. Customers noticed her presence in a way they never had before. Some glanced at her with curiosity, some with admiration, and some with quiet respect. The piano in the corner no longer seemed like an unused piece of furniture. It had become something alive, and she could feel its presence in a way she had never felt before. Her coworkers, too, seemed to sense the change. One of them lingered near the counter just a little longer when she walked by. Another whispered a compliment under their breath, unsure if she had heard it. She smiled politely, letting the words touch her without letting them change her focus. She had learned long ago to keep her guard up at work, to never rely on praise or recognition. But this time, the gestures felt different, warmer, and they made her heart lift slightly. During the slower afternoon hours, she found herself drawn to the piano again. Her fingers hovered above the keys as she considered whether to play. The memory of the first time she had performed in front of the restaurant came rushing back, the stunned faces, the silent pause, the applause that had followed. It had been terrifying, exhilarating, and freeing all at once. She remembered how it had felt to be fully seen, not as a waitress, but as someone with a voice, someone capable of creating beauty. This time, however, she did not play immediately. She wanted to test herself, to see if she could reclaim that courage without hesitation. She sat down on the bench and closed her eyes, letting her mind drift. Slowly, the music began to rise from within her, soft and delicate at first, then stronger and more confident. She felt herself smile as the notes filled the room, drawing attention once again without her needing to force it. Customers paused mid-bite, heads turning, ears straining to catch every sound. A group of friends leaned closer, whispering to each other, their eyes wide. Even the usually distracted children were silent, captivated by the melody that seemed to speak directly to them. She realized as she played that music had a way of touching people that words never could. It bypassed judgment, bypassed routine, and went straight to the heart. Her hands moved faster now, more confident, as if the piano remembered her touch even better than she remembered the piano. Every note she played carried her emotions, the frustration of long days, the quiet longing she had carried for years, and the joy of rediscovering herself. The melody was not perfect, but it was honest, raw, and full of life. It demanded attention and respect, and the room responded accordingly. The manager, who had often overlooked her, watched from the doorway with a mixture of surprise and admiration. He had never imagined that the quiet waitress he saw every day could hold such talent, such presence. Other staff members peeked out from the kitchen, unable to tear their eyes away. For a few moments, she realized the restaurant had stopped being just a workplace. It had become a stage, and she was the performer, commanding the attention she had always secretly longed for. A woman at a table near the window whispered to her companion, her voice trembling slightly, "She's amazing. Do you hear that?" Who would have thought? The companion nodded, equally captivated, their eyes never leaving her hands as they danced across the keys. The music seemed to touch something deep within each person, stirring memories, emotions, and dreams they had long forgotten as she played. She noticed something remarkable. Her own confidence was growing with every note. She no longer hesitated or second-guessed herself. Each movement was deliberate, each pause intentional. She was in control, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly powerful. The music was her language, her voice. She realized that it could reach people in a way nothing else could. A few customers approached after the song ended. Hesitant at first, unsure if it was appropriate to speak to someone working at a restaurant. "You're incredible," one said softly. "I didn't know you could play like that." Another nodded, adding, "It's beautiful. You should play more often." She thanked them quietly, feeling a warm glow of pride and satisfaction. It was different from the usual compliments about service or appearance. This recognition was about her talent, about her story being told without words. Her coworkers began to treat her differently as well. There was a subtle shift in their tone, a newfound respect. A coworker who had always been dismissive nodded when she passed by. Another complimented her skills quietly as they worked side by side. She felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced at this job. For once, she was seen not as someone serving tables, but as a person with depth, with passion, with hidden talents that mattered. That night, after the restaurant had emptied, she sat at the piano alone once more. The silence felt different now, full, welcoming, and expectant. She allowed herself to play without restraint, letting the music flow freely, exploring rhythms and melodies she had once only dreamed of. The piano seemed to respond, each note carrying her deeper into a place of comfort, of joy, of freedom. She thought about her life outside the restaurant. How many years had she spent pushing her passion aside for survival? How many nights had she lain awake, imagining what it would feel like to play in front of an audience, to be heard, to be appreciated? The answers were countless, and the weight of lost time pressed heavily on her heart. Yet in that moment, the music reminded her that it was never too late. The piano was patient, the world still open, and she could reclaim pieces of herself she had almost forgotten. The next few days became a routine of discovery. During quieter moments at work, she would sit at the piano and play, letting the music spill out naturally. Customers began to notice, whispers spreading throughout the restaurant about the waitress who could play the piano. Some came specifically to hear her, while others stumbled upon the music unexpectedly. Each time, the reactions were the same: amazement, awe, and respect. Her confidence continued to grow. She began to see herself differently, no longer just as a waitress enduring the monotony of long shifts, but as someone capable of inspiring others, of creating beauty, of being seen for who she truly was. The piano had given her more than music had given her a sense of identity, a reminder of her worth, and the courage to embrace her talent openly. The restaurant itself changed subtly as well. The staff moved with more energy. The atmosphere felt lighter, and customers seemed more engaged. People lingered a little longer, smiles lasted a little longer, and conversations carried a new warmth. Her music had become a quiet force, transforming the space in ways she had never imagined. One evening, a local music teacher happened to dine at the restaurant. He had come for a meal, expecting nothing more than an ordinary evening. But the moment the piano started, he froze. He listened, captivated, as the waitress played with skill, emotion, and passion. When the music ended, he approached her, offering encouragement and praise that went beyond polite compliments. "You have a gift," he said. "Have you ever thought about performing more seriously?" She smiled, unsure how to respond. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. She had spent years believing that music was a luxury she could not afford, that survival came first and dreams came second. Yet here was someone recognizing her talent in a way she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. It stirred something deep inside her, longing, a hope, and a question. What if she could do more than this? The recognition from the teacher, combined with the reactions of customers and coworkers, began to shift her perspective. She realized that she had been living in a small, limited version of herself, one defined by routine and responsibility. But her talent, her passion, her music, these were parts of her that could not be ignored forever. They demanded attention, and now, slowly but surely, she was giving them that attention. She continued to play, day after day, allowing herself to experiment, to explore, to grow. Each performance, no matter how brief or unplanned, strengthened her confidence and deepened her connection to the music. She felt alive in ways she had almost forgotten, and the quiet fire within her heart burned brighter with each note. Her coworkers began to seek her out for advice, for guidance, and for collaboration. Customers requested songs, complimented her skill, and shared stories of how her music had touched them. She realized that she was no longer invisible, that her presence mattered, and that her talent could inspire others. And as she sat at the piano, fingers dancing across the keys, She understood something profound. Life had given her challenges, responsibilities, and limitations. But it had never taken away her essence. Her music, her talent, her passion, they had waited patiently for her, ready to return when she was willing to embrace them. In those quiet moments, surrounded by the soft hum of an empty restaurant, she allowed herself to dream again. She imagined a life where music was not just a secret, a hobby, or a fleeting escape, but a central part of who she was. She imagined the joy of performing for an audience that truly listened, of creating melodies that could touch hearts, and of finally being recognized for her true self. The piano had given her more than sound, it had given her courage, hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. And she knew with a certainty that filled her chest and lit her eyes that this was only the beginning. The restaurant had never felt quite the same since the first time she had played the piano in front of people. Every shift carried a subtle change in the air, sense that something had shifted not only in her life, but also in the lives of those around her. Customers who had once barely noticed her now watched with quiet curiosity. Coworkers, too, seemed to carry a new respect, a new awareness of the woman who could make music fill a room without even trying. She arrived for her shift that morning, tying her apron as usual, but her heart carried a quiet excitement she could not ignore. The memory of playing yesterday, of feeling alive, of seeing faces light up, stayed with her like a warm breeze brushing against her skin. She had begun to realize that the piano was more than an instrument. It was a bridge between her dreams and the world. And today, for some reason, she felt that bridge calling her more strongly than ever. During the quiet moments of the morning, she moved to the piano almost instinctively. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly with anticipation. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember every lesson, every practice, every hour she had spent learning to let the music speak for her. Slowly, she pressed the first note. The sound was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried something deep inside her. The music began to flow naturally, each note unfolding into the next. Customers who were reading menus or chatting softly paused my action, tilting their heads to listen. A few glanced toward the piano with curiosity, unsure if they were imagining the beauty that was filling the air. She continued, letting her emotions guide her fingers, letting the piano speak the words she could not say aloud. By the time she looked up, she realized that almost the entire restaurant had stopped. Chairs had ceased scraping, conversations had faded, and all eyes were on her. It was not a large audience, but it felt enormous. She had never been used to being noticed, to having attention focused on her for something other than the work she did. The feeling was strange, thrilling, and frightening all at once. The music shifted, carrying a new intensity. It was no longer just notes on a scale. It was a story, her story. She thought of every long shift she had endured, every day she had felt invisible, every moment she had pushed her dreams aside to survive. All of it poured out through her fingers, through the keys, through the air around her. And the restaurant responded. The hum of life became a quiet background to the melody, a reminder that her voice, in its own way, could change the world around her. A young boy sitting near the piano watched with wide eyes. His mother whispered to him, encouraging him to stay quiet so they could hear better. Another table of friends had stopped mid-laughter, captivated by the music. Even the cooks, peeking from the kitchen, seemed drawn in, holding their breath as if the music had the power to stop time itself when the song ended. Silence stretched for a long moment. She lowered her hands slowly, letting the final note linger in the air. And then it happened to applause. Not loud, not forced, but real, honest, and heartfelt. One person started, then another, until the room was filled with clapping, cheers, and whispers of admiration. Her chest tightened, and a smile spread across her face. A smile that felt genuine and true, unlike the polite smile she wore at tables every day. A man at the counter, a regular who had always been polite but distant, spoke quietly to his friend. "Did you hear that? She's incredible." "I had no idea." His friend nodded, equally amazed. They looked at her with new eyes, seeing not just a waitress, but someone extraordinary. After the applause died down, the manager approached her cautiously. He had been watching quietly, unsure of how to react. "That was amazing," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I don't know why we didn't know about this before." She nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. It was strange being recognized for something that had been part of her all along, something she had always thought she had to hide. That evening, a small group of customers lingered, curious to meet the woman behind the music. One of them, a local music producer who had stopped in for dinner, introduced himself and offered words that she had never imagined hearing. "You have something rare," he said. "Talent, yes, but more than that, emotion, presence. Have you ever considered performing somewhere bigger?" Her heart raced. She shook her head slowly, unsure how to respond. She had spent so long believing that music was a private dream, one that existed only for herself, one that could never survive in the real world of bills, jobs, and responsibilities. And now, here was someone seeing it as something tangible, something worth sharing. The producer smiled kindly. "I don't mean tomorrow or next week. I just mean, maybe this is the start of something. You have to believe it too." She nodded again, words failing her. She was not used to opportunity being handed so freely, to recognition being genuine rather than obligatory. The thought of performing, of stepping beyond the walls of the restaurant, filled her with both fear and excitement. Days passed, and the story of her music began to spread quietly. Customers returned, asking if she would play again. Friends told friends. Whispers turned into curiosity, and curiosity turned into admiration. The restaurant, once just a place to work, had become a small stage where she could share a piece of herself with the world. She continued to play during quieter shifts, each time growing more confident. Her music became more fluid, more expressive, more her. The piano, patient and understanding, responded to every emotion, every thought, every dream she had carried silently for so long. She realized that it had never been about the audience or recognition. It had been about reclaiming herself, about finding a place where she could be fully alive. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, she stayed at the piano long after the last customer had left. The restaurant was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft glow of the lights. She let her fingers wander across the keys, exploring new melodies, new rhythms, new expressions. She felt free in a way she had not felt since childhood, before life's hardships had pushed her dreams aside in the quiet. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. Long hours of work, sacrifices made, dreams postponed, none of it had been easy. But the piano had waited, patient and unwavering, ready for the moment she was brave enough to return. And now she understood that patience, persistence, and courage could create miracles in the smallest and most unexpected places. Her phone buzzed softly on the counter. A message from the producer. "When you're ready, let's talk about next steps. The world needs to hear this." Her chest tightened with excitement and fear. She had never imagined an opportunity like this. Never imagined that her life, ordinary and predictable for so long, could shift so suddenly, so completely. And yet she felt ready. Not completely, but ready enough to try. She looked around the empty restaurant, eyes lingering on the piano one last time. It had been her companion through years of struggle and silence, her reminder that beauty could exist even in ordinary places. She smiled softly, feeling gratitude, hope, and anticipation mingling in her chest. This was more than a job, more than music. It was her life unfolding in a way she had almost forgotten could happen, and as she stood to leave for the night, she whispered quietly, almost to herself, "This is just the beginning." The next day, she returned with renewed energy. Customers smiled knowingly, coworkers nodded with respect, and the piano waited patiently in the corner, ready for her fingers to bring it to life once more. She sat down, pressed the first key, and felt the music flow through her again, louder and more confident than ever. It was no longer just a melody. It was her story, her voice, her life. and it had finally found its audience. The applause came naturally, effortlessly, and she smiled, knowing that she had crossed a threshold. The quiet waitress who had once felt invisible had become someone unforgettable. Not because of fame, not because of recognition, but because she had remembered who she truly was and allowed herself to be seen. And in that moment, standing between the keys and the room full of faces, she knew one truth that would stay with her forever. Sometimes, one small act of courage, one moment of bravery, is all it takes to change everything. The piano had given her her voice. The world was finally listening.